Hello, everyone. Welcome to this joint meeting of the South Kingstown Town Council and the South Kingstown School Committee. It is Monday, December 16th. The time is 7 o'clock. Our first order of business is the pledge to the flag. Please rise and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Council President Collins.
Here.
Council Vice President DeCruz.
Here.
Councilwoman Kelso.
Here.
Councilman McAvoy.
Here.
Councilman Bailey. Here.
Thank you very much. We have a fairly short agenda tonight. We're here to hear the pro forma budgets and take any comments. A on the list is the pro forma for the municipal budget. Are you ready to take it away, Rob?
We're going to change it up on everybody a little bit here this year, and that's because the new superintendent has correctly pointed us toward a statute that points out that this meeting is supposed to be a pre-budget consultation. So we're going to provide you with some numbers, give you a sense of where we are, but we are going to spend more time tonight in discussion and consultation as the state legislature has contemplated, more than has been the practice in the past. I'll talk a little bit about the statutory framework, but before we do that, I just want to point out that this is the first in many meetings over the next few months. This meeting is, again, supposed to be an opportunity for the town council and the school committee to talk about their goals and objectives, the purpose for which we will be budgeting over the next several months. Tonight's objectives are to explain the context within which some of the budget needs are arising, to provide some starting points, the pro forma. These are sort of pro formas, very, very general assertions of where we are in terms of the state of our budgets. It is to solicit public comment on the information that's provided here tonight and on the general context within which these budgets will be developed. And then, of course, this is an opportunity for the council and for the school committee to give feedback to staff so that we can begin to develop budgets in a way that meets your expectations and objectives. This is a state statute under which tonight's meeting is being held. And under the state statute, the town council is under two obligations. The town council has to provide an estimate of projected revenues for the next fiscal year, and the estimates must be based on the tax base, not on the tax rate. The statute contemplates a very generic description of what's happening to the tax base in terms of what's available and that sort of thing. This meeting is not supposed to be about pinning down the number for a particular tax rate. The school committee is under the obligation to provide enrollment projections so that the town council can understand the student-driven need. The school committee has to provide a list of total anticipated expenses for next year. Now, this is a preliminary list, but the obligation of the school committee is to tell us what they think it's going to cost to run the school program. The school committee is obliged to provide staffing numbers, an estimated staffing level for next year, charter school expenses, and any other needs that might weigh on the council's decision or will be part of the school committee's budgeting process again over the next few months. Before we jump in, I'd like to provide some context, and I think the important thing for us to, or an important thing, one of the most important things for us to remember is that we are budgeting for a year, but we are not budgeting in 1 year isolated from the future. We are going to have to think about where we are in the next fiscal year relative to where we're going to be over the next few years. And the biggest thing on the horizon is an increase, a dramatic increase in our debt load. A school facilities improvement program and some improvements to roads and bridges in town dictate that we really consider adding more debt service, more expense on an annual basis to what we're doing now. That's going to have major implications, and we have to keep this in our minds going forward, because whatever we do for the next fiscal year is going to be cumulative, and it's going to affect our ability to take care of the debt that we're contemplating taking 2 and 3 years down the road. Much of our challenge here in South Kingstown is due to the fact that state aid to the schools has declined dramatically over the last several years. This chart demonstrates what's happened since 1996. It has been a steady decline, and it has not been getting better. It does not look to be getting better this year. In fact, we'll get to the revenues, and we're really anticipating a substantial decline again this year. Just to let folks know what's been happening on the local side, as the state has been dropping its funding, the municipality has increased its property tax transfer. This is a cumulative chart showing the rate of growth in each of the years going back to 2006. Right after the property tax program came into place, after the school funding from the state wasn't coming in, the town scrambled, tried to figure out what it could do. There wasn't a whole lot going in early. Over the last several years, the increases have been significant. Last year, you'll recall that the property tax transfer was at the cap of 4%. Next slide, right? However, the budget history is that we've been basically treading water with the school budget. There has not been substantial growth, and there has not been a major decline. Of course, this is happening at a time when the student population has been in decline, so we have seen locally an increase in one of the metrics that folks like to talk about a lot, which is the cost per pupil. It is worth noting again that the cost of the program has not appreciably increased over time. It's only by the metric cost per student that the cost of the overall program has increased. Just to show you how much the state revenue has declined, and to sort of share with you my favorite sort of thumbnail statistic on state assistance to the South Kingstown schools, you'll notice that in 1996, the state was sending about 30% of the aid being provided to South Kingstown, or 30% of the cost of the education program here in South Kingstown. Last year, that number was about 9%. And you'll note that the high watermark in terms of absolute dollars was $10 million, and we were projecting, actually we're down a little bit even from the $4,617,000. We're now projecting $4,500,000 and some odd dollars from the state. If you consider that the state is sending $4,600,000, $4,617,000 at this estimate, and the fact that our transportation program is $4.5 million, $4.4 million, the state is really only sending about $200,000 more than the cost of our transportation. That's about $75 per student. The state is sending essentially no aid to South Kingstown at this point. No aid above the cost of transportation. It's just an amazing statistic to me. So what is a municipal budget and what isn't it? Municipal budget is an operating plan for all of the town's activities, including the schools, the police, the senior center, and every other program or service that we provide here in South Kingstown. This is what we pay for, and this is a list of the way we pay for it. A couple of interesting things have happened during the course of our conversations between the superintendent's office and our office. One of the things that I think is a very positive step is the superintendent has brought in an expectation that the schools look at their budget from a zero base. This concept is sometimes misunderstood as you start from what you've got and you go from there. That's not what a zero-based budget is. What a zero-based budget is you start from bare metal. If we had no program at all, what would we need? How many people would we need to provide this program? How much equipment would we need to provide this program? Then you put prices to those personnel and equipment requirements or resources. That's a huge step forward. I mean, that's just a huge change in the way budgeting has been done. And I want to applaud the superintendent for taking this step. It gets us to the point where we're looking at our programs in isolation from the history I just showed you. It gets us to the point where we're beginning to look at the education program as if we had nothing and we're designing the best possible system. Now, this is a big task for a single year. I'm not expecting miracles in 1 year, but it is a big change in philosophy, and it's a major step forward. The other thing that is coming into better focus, this is a concept that the town has relied on for many years, performance-based budgeting. It's evaluative, outcome-oriented, and it looks to make sure that we're making the best possible investment. It compares how we're spending dollars here as opposed to what we would get if we spent them over here. That's sort of a comparative evaluation. Again, a major step forward, a huge analytical tool that can yield incredibly beneficial results. It's not just saying, this is what we did last year, this is what we need to continue with what we did last year. It's looking at all of the dollars available and saying, where do we put these to have the best impact? Big deal. We're actually adopting this year, over on the municipal side, the schools mantra here. They note that the schools in South Kingstown are a collaborative community where all means all. And I think that's really a perfect articulation of the right principle, and I think it's also the right principle when we talk about municipal programs. It's what I hear when I talk to citizens. Equitable treatment for all taxpayers, all residents, all students, all seniors, all families, all public employees. That's what we're trying to do when we get together and we talk about designing a budget that meets the needs of the community, the needs of the school, the needs of the police department, the needs of the highway division, everybody. We've got to decide where the needs are. And this is our reaching out across to Linda and to the school community and saying, we've got to just ask, and you've had this conversation with us before, we've got to look for ways to balance the needs of the schools and the needs of the EMTs and the needs of the police department and the needs of the recreation department. Affordable housing is one of our major issues outside of schooling. I won't dwell on this. I will point out that if we think about sort of turning the dollar bill on its end, there is definitely room for an analysis that says we are in for some redistribution. We are in for some reassessment of how each dollar is spent. We will see that with regard to debt service. Clearly, if we are $90 million in debt 3 or 4 years from now, that 2 cents is going to be more like, what do we got? We just did that, 20 cents. Yeah, it's going to be more than 20 cents. It's going to be about, it's going to be well north of 2. On the equity thing, the other factor that I think we have to keep in mind is that we are a community of very diverse demographics in terms of income and wealth. We tend to focus, when we think about the tax rate, when we think about the impact on the community, when we think about affordability, we tend to think about the median or the average income, and we tend to think about the median home value. But the median is just one measure. And in fact, in South Kingstown, it may not be the best measure. We have, I would suggest, a bimodal income distribution. We have folks on the high end, a large number of folks who do very well, and we got folks at the other end. And there's sort of a hump before you get to the average on the low end. And every time we raise a tax rate, it may well be that the folks on the high end can do just fine with that. But the impact on folks at the low end of the income distribution may not. And the same is true when we consider home values. I pointed out last year that about 1/5 of our housing stock is valued at less than $250,000. 1/5. The average home value is $370,000 this year. When we make decisions around 370, we have an impact equal in terms of the rate on the folks who are living in homes that are worth 250 and less. That's important for us to keep in mind. If we are truly committed to the principle of equity, we're going to keep those folks in mind as we set tax rates and move forward. Just a distribution of low and moderate income housing in Wakefield. This is Wakefield, this is downtown, and you will note that the red are deed-restricted low and moderate income housing. These are the units the state of Rhode Island has identified as low and moderate income housing. The value for a low and moderate income house in South Kingstown now is $329,000. The blue dots represent homes that sold for less than $329,000 in the last 3 years, and the green parcels represent properties that we have assessed at less than $329,000. Most of Wakefield is lower moderate income if you use only the value metric. That's 329, which is well below the 360, 370 that we typically consider when we evaluate. And then to get to the issue of sort of uneven distribution, you will note that those dark parcels are not everywhere in town. So again, while we have plenty of folks of means who can afford increased tax rates, we have plenty of folks in town who may not be as readily able to do so. All right, to our revenue projections. We're projecting a 2% increase for state aid. We're seeing this mostly because of some increases. It's not a dramatic increase either. In the hotel and meals remittance, we've seen steady growth in these two funds for the last several years. We're projecting an increase of what we've seen year to date in the hotel remittance is about 4.8%. I think we're not going to be far off of that. I'm expecting that next year will be closer to 6.5, because we're going to have the new hotel over on Route 1 open the full season. But we're not going to see double-digit increases in that tax, and even at that, it's not a huge revenue generator for the town. Meals remittance has actually gone up substantially, 16.7%, but that brings us to about $100,000 for the year. It's not going to save our bacon in terms of increasing non-property tax revenues.
Rob,
yes.
Question there.
Sure.
96,000 in the meal tax. Is that the increase or is that the total?
No, that's the total September to September. Yeah, the increase is 16% of that. It was about $15,000. Licenses and fees. I'm going to mess myself up here. Nope, there we go. We're anticipating a modest increase here. We don't see anything dramatic here. The only thing that is a real positive is the new leases at Marina Park. They're not going to drive us by that amount, but an optimistic revenue projection is just under 3%. This gets us, this figure, $1,332,000. We've been up and down. We bob around that. It's not a radical change in the projection. Again, with some expectation of increased rents. Yeah, I'm comfortable with this. As we continue with the budgeting process, it may be adjusted. Fines and charges, again, this is just a steady extrapolation of what the growth has been over the last 4 or 5 years. No reason to think we're going to see any dramatic changes. There's nothing in terms of building permits that is on the horizon that gives us a whole lot of hope for sort of unexpected or unusual growth in this area. We've got the South Shore Country Club project that is still underway, but we've seen that now for 2 years. That's built into this number. We've got a couple of small to medium-sized housing projects. There's a housing project proposed for Curtis Corner Road, Avenue, Street? Curtis Corner Road. 32 units are proposed to go in there. We've got an 18-unit housing proposal. But again, there's nothing big on the horizon that would suggest that we're going to see much of an increase in this area. License fees and rent, I've been there. We're going to go back the other way. Investment income, really, this is just something I don't feel comfortable projecting a whole lot onto. The rates for return have not been stellar. We actually went high with our estimate on the adopted last year. This is exactly what was adopted. It was $75,000 more than we were projecting. We're not far off what we actually adopted, so I'm comfortable with holding our place here, but I don't think there's room for a whole lot, and it's not a huge number. Last year, we saw a school transfer associated with a repayment on, was it health insurance? It was a repayment back from the schools. I think it was on health insurance. There was a health insurance premium or something that came back. There obviously is, we're not anticipating the schools giving money to the general fund. Fund balance, at this point, I am proposing that we not consider fund balance for the budget. Obviously, we have fund balance. We can tap it. It is a policy decision. My recommendation is that we're in pretty good stay, but we're not at the top of the recommendation with regard to fund balance. So at this point, very early, this is a consultation. This isn't the pro forma that we've done in the past. We're not projecting any. Our anticipated tax roll growth is, it's not particularly anemic. It's not much lower than what we typically see, but as of this afternoon, the tax assessor's projection is that we're going to be at just under 1% growth. We've seen anywhere from 0.5% to 2%. This is right in the ballpark of where our growth is. We are a slow growth community, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.75% to 1% growth is what we should expect in the next fiscal year. Which means that we're not going to see growth sort of cover the costs that we've got to cover next year. We're going to have to go back to existing taxpayers. I want to share three little cheats, if you will, three budget hacks for folks to remember and think about and use when they can. For every penny increase in the tax rate, we've got $50,000. So for every $50,000, we also have a penny increase. And that's $3.70. So if we increase the budget by $50,000, it's going to cost the typical homeowner in a $370,000 home $3.70. Every $1 million in debt adds 10 cents to the tax rate, and about $37 on that $370,000 home. This year, our tax cap, if we were to go to the maximum allowed under state law, our tax cap is $2,968,990. This is just a table that shows those principles borne out on a table. So if we were to increase the property tax levy by 1%, it would cost $51 for a homeowner in a $370,000 home. If we go to 2%, it's $104 for that household. At 3%, it's $162, and at 4%, it's $215. I will note that inflation over the last 12 months has been running at 2.3%. I generally think that it's a good thing if you can do to try to be lagging inflation rather than leading inflation. We're in the 2.5 range if we hold to that principle. But again, these are policy choices. I'm not going to focus too much on this. I will just point out that the schools, after consultation with my office, are proposing in their overall sort of scheme of things right now 2%. All right. Now, I'm going to hand this over to Linda as soon as we get through this neat little moving graphic. But again, this meeting is supposed to be about shared goals and objectives. So once we get through with the presentation that the schools are going to make here, I'd like us to have a conversation about this, about the goals and objectives that are shared between the two bodies, and sort of move us toward some principles that we can use going forward. The point of that graphic was the goal is the end state. It's not the short-term objective. The short-term objective is the objective. And when we get to it, we're going to go through an exercise to sort of talk about what the long-term, big-picture stuff is, and then we're going to talk about what you guys want to see us doing over the next year. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Linda. All right, so
thank you. So I'm Linda Savastano, your not-so-new superintendent now. We're 5 months in, so thank you for your warm welcome, and it's an honor to be here tonight, and I appreciate the partnership and the support that the town manager and his office have provided to all of us. I also am going to ask that Mary Ann help tonight as we talk through or walk through this. I am referencing 16.221, which shares that we should be sharing with you tonight the anticipated total expenditures, projected enrollments. Of course, then that would have an impact to our staffing and those requirements. In addition, the estimated enrollment and payment to charter schools, and then finally, consideration of mandated changes that would have an impact to the school program or operations. So hopefully that's kind of what you'll see through this lens. At the end, there is the pro forma, so we'll talk through that. Ultimately, I do want to share our goal throughout this entire budget season will be for us to build our budget plan to support success for our students, knowing that our students are the most important asset that any community has, and especially for us. It is our commitment to serve this community and our students with an overwhelming success, despite this last year of our reduction of state aid. I do want to share that I have this presentation available on board docs with the off of the school department's posting for tonight's meeting, so the link to this is available. And then the other piece I just wanted to share is that there is backup to pieces. So in order to keep this a presentation and not a report, I have a high level, but there is the backup for folks who maybe are at home or want to look later to some of the supporting information. Ultimately, we're working from a goal-based budget. So in order for us to build the priorities this year, and from the ground up, from the zero-based up, as much as I can this year, we first need to know what the primary need is. And so we've worked with all of our building leadership to have them dig into their goals and then share it out as a team. And ultimately, that comes down to being focused on literacy and math, but also a very strong drive to enrich our social emotional well-being and the support system that we have. So when I had mentioned earlier those goal areas that we will see changes when we think about the FY21 budget, so the pieces that we know will have an impact to the decisions we make, the next couple of slides, I just wanted to share that piece. So our social emotional, our literacy, and our math, and we are shifting from one of ultimately achievement to growth. So our goal of seeing children grow and not necessarily always be proficient, but just take steps forward and allowing us to personalize for our children as we work with them. Another area, and this is clearly identified in our state report card that was just released, is to help us to focus on areas that will allow us to increase attendance, our graduation rates, reduce suspension rates, and really focus in on those students in those high-risk subgroups. Again, this is not a comprehensive program. These are the areas that we would look at changing moving forward for next year. So that would mean having, for us, areas that we've spoken about and are working towards would be having an engaging STEAM program for our non-dual language students to really focus on the program growth for what's been called the monolingual, but really the non-DLI programming. And then also we know that our next step with our DLI program is grade 5. We also know we need to, we are rebuilding, reworking through our programming for special education. Also expanding our world language down to the kindergarten level. And again, these are goal areas. It doesn't mean they will all happen next year, but these are areas that through the community, through working with the principals, our leadership, that we are identifying as areas of need. Also, the social emotional learning and health curriculum, clearly identified as an area from our wellness subcommittee. There is a change in the state standards, the learning standards for the visual and performing arts, which means for us re-examining that curriculum. And then we are also looking at an expansion for an engineering pathway at the high school and also at Curtis Corner. This would also help the career technical work that we've been doing at the high school. It would also allow us to have a very strong partnership with the University of Rhode Island. We've also already met with the World Language Department there because it would nicely dovetail with their international engineering program. And then additional areas that where we have changes are the implementation of a senior project and paper for our high school students. Our high school is under a NEASC accreditation visit this year, and so we would expect to need to consider those recommendations moving forward after that visit is complete. And then finally, continuing to work on our student-centered learning and our collaborative learning environment. So building the culture of collaboration and really thinking through the project-based learning. As we've taken a look at buildings and considered our facilities and what the classroom looks like for 21st century, it's allowed us to overlay this work and then really to think about brain-based research and what learning should look like for the 21st century. So the next area I was going to step us through are the enrollment numbers. I have a math background and I love numbers, but I know that not everybody always does. So we've sliced these from different perspectives. And this year, as we talk through the budget, and we have a new budget subcommittee that we're working with, we are trying to drill down to really look through the lens of a building. New Rhode Island law asks that really gives, empowers principals. And so it's important that we take a look, not only, this is a district lens, looking at historic, and then also looking at our percentage of free and reduced lunch, special education, our English language learners, different demographics, also a breakdown from each school. But then I was going to drill into each building a little bit, because we are asking that when we submit and have that final budget, that we not only have it from a district lens, but we also have it from each location. I do want to share, as we're looking at numbers, that we are not only looking at those students that are enrolled in our schools, but those students that we also pay to educate in other locations. They are still our children, and we still work with them, we work with their families, and they are part of our enrollment. The next school is, and I have a template similar to this that will kind of quickly step through each school. So and this will drill down the amount of students in each school, in each grade, excuse me. And then again, the percentage of the English language learners, the free and reduced lunch, the special education, and then also the demographic. But I also want to point out the school report cards have recently come out, so as we step through, I'll kind of pull that out as the area to highlight. All of our schools were identified by the Department of Education as 3-star schools, except for Peacedale, which was identified as a 4-star school. And they identify areas, in some cases, areas of need. And those areas of need should help us to identify, and have helped us to identify, areas that we know that we need to work on as we build our budget. So for Wakefield, for example, it's to focus on the area of achievement for our students with disabilities. At Matunic, Matunic had the same from the report card, and they also have an area of need of achievement for students with disabilities. And I'm happy to speak to any of the numbers. So West Kingston last year was a 3-star school and was cited as an area needing achievement for our students with disabilities. They additionally identified the area of overall performance and made a note for us to focus on addressing chronic absenteeism and our suspension rate. Chronic absenteeism is defined by the Department of Ed as students that are absent more than 10%. The other piece I just wanted to identify at West Kingston and also at Peacedale, these schools both support our dual language immersion program. They are both have integrated pre-K programs, and they also are each targeted Title I schools, so targeted assistance Title I schools. So they have federal dollars to support a reading program. Peacedale was our 4-star school, and they did not have any areas that the Department of Education identified. With that said, we know that we're always on the path for continuous improvement. Broad Rock is our grades 5 to 6 school, currently has 440 students, and was identified in the area of achievement and growth. So not only achievement, but achievement and growth for students with disabilities. And Curtis Corner is our current middle school for grades 7 and 8 with 468 students. Curtis Corner was a 3-star, but they were not identified. They did not have any areas that were identified as areas of need. And then finally, the high school. Our high school is grades 9 through 12 with 920 students in it today. It also was a 3-star school, and when we were looking at areas of need, the area of achievement and graduation for students with disabilities, and the graduation rate for our American Indians subgroup. Do you want it I don't have it. They would be going by last year's. I'll have to look that up for you. So our enrollment, our projected enrollment, what is used here is the NESDEC. So our NESDEC is I'm sure that you've seen NESDEC before. It's a not-for-profit educational organization. And so when we take a look at NESDEC reporting, they will project information, and this report, and there's a link to the complete report from here, but this report is based upon estimated births, which is in the light blue, children that have already been born, which is in the turquoise, and then in white is the students that are already enrolled. So we submit data to NESDEC in the early fall, and then they share this information with us in November. I've used NESDEC over the years. Sometimes it aligns, and sometimes you just have to take a look at your current trends and kind of find the happy medium, and sometimes enrollment is a tricky thing to predict. So with as of today, the budget that we're working towards, I've taken the areas for the staffing and broken it down in categories. So administrators, certified staff, which includes teachers, counselors, nurse, support staff, and which is a total today of 450 staff members. And then just because I think it's important to really take a look at staffing and to see the closeness it is to students. We should see the majority of our students closest to the child in the classroom and not segregated from. And I do feel like here, when we're looking at the gray area and the yellow, those are the folks that are closest with working with our kids every day. We would not see, we are reworking staff. We know that we would need to have a change to support the dual language program in 5th grade. And then we are also looking at the health curriculum programming that needs to happen at the elementary. Does not mean that we cannot repurpose existing staff and consider reallocations. We also already have had retirements, and I'm sure folks have seen we've accepted those at school committee meetings.
So, Linda, I have a question. So the projected staffing for 21 is 450?
So as of today, this is where we are. But I guess that to me, this is a snapshot in time. So this is where. So we are still working on this. I don't want to say like, yes, done, check. It's December, and we know. We sat this afternoon 2 hours ago with a director peeling back and analyzing and overanalyzing every need. And we sat this morning with our leadership team, and then we sat with the elementary principals after that to go through their staffing and what that looks like and shifts and how we can be most efficient.
And then how is that number compared to the number today?
This does not have significant change from today. Does from a year ago, doesn't from today. This is our charter school, and we also included our vocational schools. So our charter schools include Compass, Kingston Hill, Green School, Rhode Island Nursing, Village Green, and International Charter. And then the vocational or CTE schools are the Met, Charahoe, Westerly, not currently, but in the past, North Kingstown, and Narragansett. So in our projections, we would see that we would have around 188 students total that we would pay tuition to other locations. So with this said, we are working hard to be able to offer personalized and different pathways to support our children so that we can be competitive with these things.
So, Linda, that was the question I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at the trend, not so bad on the normal charter schools, but on the vocational schools, it just seemed to be increasing quickly.
It does. I think it's one of the reasons that we took a look at that engineering pathway. It's really hard to be competitive, I think, today without having that. It's a very popular field and sees significant job placement for students, and so it's adding one course. It's not adding staffing. And it would be for us a swap out of something that we're already doing. We did hold an open house to the general public and advertised a couple of weeks ago, so we will continue to do that outreach. In addition, our high school team went to visit other locations. So they went out to other schools. So they'll go to schools that have 8th grade and put on, share the great things and the great work we're doing.
How are we doing on marketing our own CTE programs? The reason why I asked that question is because I've heard people say, look, Narragansett as an example, they like the fact that kids from South Kingstown are going to Narragansett because it helps their bottom line. So I remember in the past I've seen stuff mailed to my house from Narragansett and from Charahoe. But do we have a program that's going to be, or do you think we'll have one soon?
We did, I don't know if you saw in the newspaper, we had an advertisement a couple of weeks ago. So trying to put out there those ads, and just as much as a private school would function, we're working to do that. We weren't on the agenda for Jamestown's 8th grade high school night, but we asked and they let us come with 1 day's notice, had a team there. So we're working on that marketing. We know it's an area we need to work on, and we are passionate about it. You're absolutely right. Our budget subcommittee did meet, and we talked about the high cost expenses, which I know are not any surprises to folks. Again, off of this presentation is the backup that we shared, but we for today, and based upon what we know, have a health insurance increase of 6%. We have an increase of 3% for salaries, with some knowns and some unknowns. But of course, things like salary steps are knowns. Some negotiations are complete and some are not. In addition, we know that career technical education tuition, seeing a 3% increase, charter school tuition from last year's a 3% increase. Transportation, which includes statewide. So not only those students that we transport within our district, but also to other schools outside of our district. And then also an increase in our special education department. I'm going to point out, here there is a link to special education information, and it's FY18 because that's the most recent per pupil special education that's available from the Department of Education. And I know we talk about a high cost of our per pupil in general, but the per pupil for our special education students was very high, top 3 in the state. So it is an area that we know we need to dig in and peel back and do work with the Department of Ed to understand how they are analyzing that, to help us to analyze it, because it is an area that we need to understand and know that if we're going to invest in that, that the outcomes then need to be improved upon.
Linda, I don't, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Of course.
No, you can go. You can go first.
So I don't want to get too hung up on this because, again, this is a consultation. This is not sort of a presentation of the budget. I will point out that that list of high-cost items and the total expense involved with the school sort of just extrapolating exceeds our 4% cap even without the municipal program. We're at 2.9 million as a possible without going to the legislature for permission to exceed the cap. Their need is in excess of 3 million.
We're not presenting today.
I know.
No, I know.
We're not presenting today.
And again, I want to not make too much of it because this isn't a presentation of a budget.
No.
It is important to keep in context as we begin the conversation that need is greater than our ability to pay.
So, Rob, just one quick update. Normally we have a table over there with our agendas and handouts. Are those the agendas and handouts that
Yes.
They are, yes.
I don't think everyone in the audience probably realizes that they're...
Thank you.
If anyone would like
can
an
get
agenda
up.
or a handout, they're up here on the first chair. Yep. Sorry, the table was not out when we came in, and the other room is being used, so...
I just wanted to weigh in quickly with the per pupil expenditure for special education. That is something that can probably be audited, and until we audit it, I would not personally trust that number. It's up to everyone else, but
Or think that it needs to stay there. We can think we can do better. Yeah. Or we know we can do better. So our expected state aid, we know that we are in, from the Department of Education's perspective, South Kingstown is considered an overfunded district. And we know that they consider us that because we are in year 10 of a 10-year reduction, right? This is the final year. This current year, FY20, 9.98% of our budget was funded by state aid. So this year we saw a reduction. We are today, and again, we only know what we know today, but the Department of Ed has given preliminary information to us, and they have shared $579,894 reduction from where we were last year. With that said, they've also shared that they would expect it to even be reduced more because looking at our October 2019 enrollment numbers, so they suggested that we use approximately $700,000 less instead. So that was considered. So again, and I know I'm new at the table. So what we were asked to do is take what we know, roll over. All we have done is roll over the budget and put in what we know today. It doesn't mean that we have done due diligence. It doesn't mean that this is a projected budget. I would anticipate a projected budget looking dramatically different from this. With a different analysis and backup to show why we're giving you what we're giving you. Today, I'm telling you today, this is a rollover and we are sharing the knowns, what we know. We know what the Department of Ed tells us today. We know what they're telling us about the group home aid, for example, as a revenue. So there are some pieces that we are aware of. There are some places, as was shared by the town manager, that we said we use 2%. By no means does it mean that we are telling you anything other than we discussed that, but we know it's difficult here. We understand it's difficult for all departments. And we will absolutely do due diligence on this budget. But again, this is by no means the projected budget. It was not built from the ground up. It was rolled over. We are working to analyze and build and work from the ground up.
Linda, can we just go back to the last slide, because I do want to just
Of course.
point out, while this is not a pro forma, it is essentially a rollover. The only thing that I will point out is that the property tax appropriation is not a rollover number. That is 2% above this year's number. That assumes a 2% increase in the property tax transfer.
And the state aid is not a rollover. It is using the suggested information from the Department of Education. What else?
And tuition.
Yeah, we're going to be hopeful with tuition, and we're going to continue to hope that we can increase that revenue.
And Linda, one other question while we're here, and I'm sorry. The undesignated fund, what's available? What have you guys got?
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. However, it's dropped fairly significantly from the previous year. I'd have to. We do have a draft of the audit. There was a couple of things that happened last year. One in particular, if you remember, with the significant increase in voc ed tuition, we did go to the school committee and asked to take $375,000 out of our fund balance to fund the voc ed tuition. We always budget last year was $475,000 out of our fund balance to offset the property tax rate. However, we ended the year with about $115,000 surplus. So that's an additional $300,000. So it's down about $775,000 from the previous year.
But 400's doesn't deplete the fund to zero.
No, I did look, we're proposing, once we go through this in the pro forma, it is slightly less than what we had in the actual budget last year.
This is a rollover from the current year. It does include, again, the increase for steps, for salaries, so while it's a rollover, it does include those changes. It also includes the change, an increase with the health insurance at a 6%.
So this part, the state statute does contemplate our having a conversation about. What do we think is going to happen here? What do we anticipate is going to happen on this side?
This will be drilled into we have to negotiate. We have contract that we need to negotiate. We have a second contract that we need to finalize. We also need to analyze and overanalyze our staffing with our leadership team. We know that that's the biggest piece of our budget. We know that we are, so we're looking at 78, almost 80%, go forward staffing. So we know that this needs to be, I need to be able to defend it.
Quick question. I'm assuming when it says other services, that include busing, or does not include busing?
It does.
That other service is mainly transportation and your out-of-district tuitions. Makes up probably about almost 90 to 95% of that. Those are two big numbers there.
So this figure, the $63,848,000, is a rollover plus a percentage, or a percentage
Yes.
in each one of those categories? The percentage has been applied. Is that correct?
The percentage has been applied to salaries and to
Each of
benefits.
these categories from this year's.
Yes, it has.
Well, then-
Transportation increase, for example, yes.
staffing, we know we're going to see a decline in enrollment. Is the total staffing, your projection is that the total staffing will stay the same?
I wouldn't feel comfortable, I don't know that same is the answer.
What does this number translate to? Staffing,
That's a 405?
The number that, 450, that we looked at previously.
so you don't have a projection for whether that 450 will fluctuate?
It will be built on what we need. I have to be, like, I just need it to be an actual, and I don't predict. So these are, again, this just reiterates the assumptions that we talked about earlier that were applied. In addition, one thing I don't think I had said earlier is the supplies were increased by 2%. I do want to share, and I can come back to this, but I just wanted to share, because we've mentioned it a little bit, some of the areas that we are looking at and continue to look at, because it should be a goals-based conversation and identifying what the priorities are, and it helps to make the decisions. There doesn't mean that they're easy decisions, but it does help to make those decisions. We are having ongoing conversations, met with the high school principal Friday. Like, it's just, we're peeling back to analyze programs, staffing, schedules. How can we most efficiently support our children, support our staff? One large area, one concerning area is the transportation budget. And so we are trying to take a look at that from a few different lenses. One of them is to take a look at we've been doing an analysis on the statewide cost and seeing if we could apply for a waiver to pull that internally with our own local company. That may be a smart area for us to be able to save and I think have excellent service applied. Again, taking a look at the special education budget, meeting with State Department staff to help us take a look at how they have analyzed that, because they've clearly identified the same piece that we have. The other piece is that tonight we're talking about operating funds, and we're not looking at the use of federal funds and federal and grants. And I don't mean grants that we wonder if we'll get or receive that are competitive. These are known restricted funds. Title I, Title II, Title III, we're in a consortium. Title IV, IDA-B, preschool, Perkins, Perkins is applied to CTE. So is there a way for us to leverage those programs so that they support our programs normally that we also support in our operating? So together, when the federal funds support the goals of the district sharply, then we should be able to leverage them, I'm hoping. And then also taking a look at our pre-K, we're considering a consolidation by location, but then also looking at that to see if we can expand it at all and consider any kind of increase in revenue. And then also looking at the partnerships we have locally, and to try to work to see if there are ways, if we partner with some of these folks, could we provide a better program for our children, and at the same time take a look at tuitions that we are paying to figure out how to maybe have a win-win. And then ultimately in the background, our strategic plan is due and is up in 2020. And so as we work to rebuild that strategic plan, it hopefully will help us to chart our next steps.
Linda, can I ask you to elaborate on the expansion of pre-K to increase revenue?
Many districts have pre-K programs that they do collect dollars to help them with, to support.
So from existing enrollment?
It would be an expansion, so we would open it to others. So right now we have a small pre-K program that's an integrated program supporting students that need services with their peers, with students that don't need services. So we have essentially 2 classrooms in one school and 1 classroom in another. We would look to possibly expand that, and you can. Not many folks charge. It's not that you don't put this burden on the backs of the families and the kids, but you do ask for dollars to help support the program, and it should support your children's learning, because we know that if we can build a strong foundation and help their transition, it can only help in the future, which can be more efficient for us and better for kids.
Yeah, I just want to express some concern about potentially competing with for-profit and non-profit organizations in the town that are already doing this. I think it's wrong to take taxpayer dollars and compete unfairly with, again, profit and non-profit. That's a concern of mine.
Thank you. So, as shared, this is a rollover budget with applying what we know today. It is not a budget that's been built from the ground up. We are transitioning to be able to do that. We are peeling back everything that's there and uncovering every aspect. So ultimately, we want a goal-based budget that will be grounded upon what we need, as opposed to maybe just taking a rollover and applying every expense from the previous year. So this just charts out today, our kickoff, if you will, and then working through. We have a new budget subcommittee. We'll have school committee budget workshops, continue to review our programming and staffing needs, taking a look with our building and department budget requests and identifying there what part of this also is taking a good hard look at your existing inventory and then what you have. And then taking a look at the projected budget by funding source, ultimately for a school committee adoption in mid-February for our projected budget. Yes, thank you.
Switch back to the other. All right. And again, in the spirit of this being a consultation and really an opportunity to have the conversation, what I'd like to do at this point is run us through just a little exercise here. I'd like to get us thinking about goals and objectives and sort of nail down some of the high-level ideas, some of the high-level things that we're trying to achieve on the town council side and on the school committee side. And we're going to define our terms here as we go. A goal, for our purposes, is a big thing. It's what you want 5 and 10 and 15 years out. It's wishful, it's aspirational, it's where we want to be. It's expressing the idea in the biggest possible way. I want every child in South Kingstown to have a first-class education and the ability to score highly on their SATs. Very, high-level stuff. Want to make sure that every police officer has got the equipment, the training, and the backup that he or she needs wherever he may go, no matter what situation he or she may encounter, that kind of thing. An objective is much more specific, much more measurable. It's down to the nitty-gritty, and it's short-term. An objective is something that we do in the next year or two. So goals are broad. They're 5-year, 10-year, 20-year aspirational things. Objectives are short-term, next year, things that we need to build into this budget, knowing that we're trying to achieve the long-run goals. Discuss.
I had written down a note. Can you talk about some of the goals and objectives that we have on the town side, like
Yes.
the radio or
Yes.
the wall, or an example?
I will. I will talk about some of the goals and objectives that the town council has got on the left side of the screen, and some of the goals and objectives that the school committee has expressed in recent materials. And there's some overlap. And the nice thing about, this sort of high-level discussion is you can find common ground. It's when you get into the nitty-gritty that things are difficult, I think. One of the goals and objectives that the council has articulated is to consider as a general principle the ability of every taxpayer to pay. It's sort of different in a sense, but it's to acquire the resources necessary to support the goals and objectives of the programs. That's true on both the town side and the school side. The town council has expressed a desire to determine how to address the impact of continued student enrollment decline. That's an objective from a couple of years ago that was adopted by the town council that was sitting in these seats in 2017, I guess. So it's not necessarily this council's express goal, but it is a council goal out there. Use community fiscal resources wisely. The school committee has said that this is an objective of theirs. They want to make sure that when they receive funding, it's spent to enhance education, but it's spent wisely. Provide the community with adequate resources for the essential public services. Allocate resources that support student achievement. These are all high-level goals, and they all speak to the same thing, which is find the money and spend the money wisely. Achieve the fundamental core mission. Provide fiscal impact statements is one of the objectives of the town council. The school committee has said they want to coordinate resources and use them wisely. This is also ties neatly into the superintendent's articulation of performance-based budgeting, which again is all about making sure that you're measuring what you're doing to determine whether the dollars you're spending are achieving the objective, whether you're having success. And it comes down to sort of calling your shots. In fact, let's move on to the next screen because I think we can sort of distill these down to these things. Ability to pay and the need to identify resources. The superintendent has talked about the need to go look for federal grants. But the point here is that we're all trying to keep from doing harm. We're trying to figure out how what we do to fund our programs will be beneficial to the taxpayers. Conduct fiscal impact statements, link expenditures to anticipated outcomes is the school committee's articulation of that concept. Deal with the declining student enrollment. This is actually a point of some contention, I think, and I don't want to sugarcoat this. I do think that there's an inherent conflict here. I think that on the council side, it's fair to say that there is concern that the cost per student keeps going up, that the student population keeps going down, and the staffing doesn't sort of follow suit. We'll see another 3% decline in the student population next year if the projection is correct, and we won't necessarily see a 3% decline in the cost of providing services for those students. That is a concern on the council side. The school committee has said that, the objective is to achieve the best possible educational outcomes, and those things have got to be reconciled. How do you do this in a cost-effective way and yet still achieve the best possible educational outcome? providing essential public services. This, too, is something of a conflict because whether we like it or not, every municipal dollar has to be assigned either to a teacher or a police officer or emergency paramedic, or somebody is going to receive that dollar. And that is, in fact, the discussion. That's what this is all about, is figuring out how to do equity, how to do just distribution of funds so as to achieve the long-term objectives. And I would point out that it's not easy. This is not something that, in 1 year you can get right. This is something that we have to take a long view on. It is clearly the case that everyone at the table, I know, I've spoken to every one of you, everyone at the table wants to make sure that our children are ready for the future. On the town side, I'd suggest that the folks who work in the highway division, the folks who work in the police department are trying to make sure that the future is ready for our children. The opposite concept. We have to prepare our children for the future, but we also have to build a future that's good. If our legacy is to hand off to our children a dilapidated infrastructure, a tax rate that is unsustainable, and systems that don't work, a beach that is washed away because we don't replenish it, then we will have failed. We have failed not in one budget year, but we will have failed our children's future. It's a tough balancing act. And this 1 year cannot be done in isolation from those future years. Discuss.
So I think that the superintendent has been really, really clear in conversations over the last few months and also tonight that she is doing a deep dive that hasn't been done in this way for many years and is looking at all of the different programs that we offer in South Kingstown in order to create a budget from the bottom up based on what we need. So since this is really a high-level discussion tonight, I think that it's important, again, to just remember that the numbers are basically just rolled over and then added on top of based on the assumptions that we know regarding the increases. The other thing I think is really important to keep in mind tonight is that we have short-term plans and then we also have long-term plans. As everybody is aware of here tonight, we are moving towards consolidation. In the time period while we are dealing with the planning aspect of that, we want to disrupt our students as little as possible. And we want to make sure that we're using our buildings efficiently, but we also don't want to be preliminarily closing schools and stuffing kids over in one area and then moving them 2 years later. So the superintendent very clearly outlined what the projected timeline is for the plan as we move towards consolidating and closing a school and making better use of our buildings. In our meeting, I believe it was 2 meetings ago. And that's all on board docs and all available for public viewing with a lot of attached documentation and backup. So I just think that's important to recognize and also bring up for any folks that hadn't been or viewed that school committee meeting, because there are a lot of documents that show and support why we're moving forward in the way that we're moving.
So if we think about a want or a goal, one that's really important to me is that, and I would guess all of the school committee and the town council, is that every student who comes in our doors in our school district is getting the highest quality education they can, and it's well-rounded. It includes social emotional learning, but specifically it's the students, we're paying additional attention to the students that are identified in the RIDE report card as needing support. We have these student populations that are more marginalized, like those with special education needs, or from Native American students. And I would suspect even like lower income students sometimes need additional supports. I want those students especially to get high quality support that they need and deserve.
Linda, going back to one of your slides, and I forget which one it was, but it had to do with at-risk students and the suspension rates, I think. Is that correct? Was there one in there about suspension rates? Sorry? Okay. So that would be something, I think, to me, that would be very important to look at. And it's something that was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago when I was on the subcommittee for the school committee for accountability that we kind of looked at. And it's just really important because I do feel that that's a problem.
We are analyzing our suspension data. Also drilling down for subgroups, particular subgroups, but then also attendance data, because it's hard to have success when you're not there.
Yeah, and West Kingston, what, you had 18 days?
Right.
Which
10%, so 10%, chronic means 10%, 18 days. It's a lot of days. And to be identified as that being and it's not a, I mean, I'm not saying it's a tiny, tiny school, but it's not a large school either. So to be identified in that way for an elementary is not common. I'm very confident that it's an amazing place. West Kingston's an amazing place to be today. And I know that the team there, including Principal Enck, is working very, very hard. So I'm confident that we are doing everything we can in our power. But it does feel, as we're working on long-term and short-term, that needs to be an area that we know needs to be a top priority.
The other quick question I had, the star rating system, is the highest that you can get a 4 or is the highest you can get a 5?
5. So the highest you can get is a 5. It is a rubric-based, so there are different categories that they focus on. So achievement, absenteeism, teacher absenteeism actually is part of the rating. That's new for us. Also, growth, student growth. High school is also, graduation rate is part of that. And what happens is in each category you can earn a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. In each of those areas that I just mentioned, your star rating is what your lowest score is. So you could earn all 5s, but in one area earn a 3, and you are a 3-star school. Just so you know.
One other wishful goal would be to take, we have a lot of schools at 3, so to get all of our schools to a 4 or a 5, I think would be something that we should strive for.
I agree.
And I think that, Linda, focusing on student growth, whether you're in a high-risk cohort or not, that's exactly how we're going to get the 4 or 5 stars. I wanted to caution you, Rob, if you go back to that slide before with the wants. Nope. Yeah, you were on it. Paying attention to those with special needs. I just want to remind everyone this is a little bit beyond a want, because we actually are bound by federal and state law to provide students with disabilities a free and appropriate public education. And I can say for sure that South Kingstown really struggles with this, and it's gotten worse over the past decade. Our elementary schools are actually getting, lower ratings, 3 stars, because the growth, isn't substantive enough to, say that we're doing our job in that department. And I'll say this, our elementary schools are actually the place where our special education services are probably the best. They really start to lag in the middle and high school years. So I just wanted to say that I don't think making sure we're educating our students with special needs is a want in any way.
So one quick question to you on that, Alicia, was we talked about, I think in the past I always heard that people moved to South Kingstown for the special needs programming, or is that something that's not true?
That's something that used to happen, but it doesn't. Now people leave because of the special ed program.
So just on those two wishes, the special needs, exceeding the mandates, and getting to 5 stars, how do you operationalize that? What does that translate into for next year, for the next couple of years? What does that require staff? Does that require what are we contemplating as we think about the budget from 10,000 feet above?
But before you answer that, I just want to also point out that I didn't just say students who have special needs or students with learning disabilities, whatever. I'm talking about more marginalized student populations, which can be a variety of things, including, unfortunately, we can sometimes fail students based on ethnic status, income, all those things. So I just wanted to throw that out there because it's broader than just one group of students. Subpopulations we're really talking about.
So again, how does that become a budget thing? How do we sort of get our hands on that? Is it staff? Is it just
Can I just weigh in
service
quickly?
provision?
So again, paying attention to those with special needs exceed mandates. I'm actually just talking about meeting mandates. I think that's going to be our big goal because South Kingstown is not meeting the mandates for students with special needs. So it would be great to exceed mandates, but that's fanciful, I would say. Let's just meet them. I think that's a pretty solid goal.
So I would suggest that the goal here, again, is that big aspirational thing. I'm going to cut and paste this and make this a short-term objective as well, and we're just going to have meet because we're not there.
Rob, how about, I don't know what the exact word would be, not accountability, but performance-based?
So I owe a piece of data, which is the graduation rate, is 95.3. For 2018, that's the last time it was calculated, and that's for all students. But the students with disabilities at the same year was 77.8%. So sometimes it's, and we've been doing this with the recently released state assessment data to look at the gaps. So I wonder if what you're sharing, we look at the gap, so a student, whatever the population subgroup that we're looking at, a high risk to a student who's not a high risk, what's that gap and how do we close the gap?
Right.
That's what it really means, when we say that.
Does the graduation rate reflect just the dropout rate, or does it reflect
No.
the students that have gone to other departments, other districts?
It's the students whose
grade
it doesn't.
And you didn't finish 12th grade. You didn't complete 12th grade here,
Right.
South Kingstown.
But we know if you went somewhere else.
So that is reflected in
It
that
is.
graduation rate.
Yes. So if you do drop out or you do go even to a GED program, it counts as a dropout, if you will, in the formula. But if you go to another school, you go to Westerly and you graduate, then you're graduating. So they do have a state ID and they track it if you move to another country, but they do audit us to make sure that we are not just saying you moved to another country, but you really didn't. So the Department of Ed is very strict with this. We're actually auditing our 2019 June population right now, looking at everybody across the state.
So in a 5-star school, say, what would the graduation rate be for special needs population?
They would expect they would not expect you to have a gap.
Zero gap.
Because if you have a special education population that is struggling to graduate, you will not be a 5-star school. One subgroup struggling will stop you from being a 5-star school.
Can you remind us what the subgroups are, just for our...
So, for example, I'm going to kind of just rattle them out. When you're looking at graduation rate, for example, they economically disadvantaged, English learners, male, female, homeless, and in the race ethnicity, it's Asian, American Indian, or Alaskan Native, Black or African American, Hispanic, 2 or more races, or white is how they list it. And then students with disabilities. And they do have, so in the year that we were just talking about, I had shared our students with disabilities were at 77.8%, and those that did not have a disability were at a 97.096%. So we see the gap is 20%.
No, we're not part of the school committee, and we're not educators here on the town council side. Could a disability be something like a learning disability as well, or okay?
To be categorized this way, because it's Department of Education in our reporting, it is, you have been identified with having an individual education plan. You have an IEP. And it is a documented IEP to be in this category.
Ms. Savastano, can you please, I ask this question frequently, but in my opinion, at RIDE, it's a complete moving target, and day to day, I think it changes. So I ask the question again. If we have a student who comes to us in 9th grade, but takes 5 years to graduate, but successfully graduates, that counts against us still?
It counts against us for our 4-year graduation rate, which is the graduation rate that I'm sharing here, and is the graduation rate that, I don't want to say it's the most important, but it's weighted the most. They do calculate a 5-year graduation rate, and in the 5-year graduation rate, that child would count in that graduation rate. And there is also a 6-year graduation rate. But the one that's weighted the most towards points, towards your accountability, is the 4-year graduation rate. So yes, ultimately the 5-year person who graduates in 5 years, we don't get those points. At the end of the day, we just want them to be successful. So I think it's fine if they graduate in 5 years. We want a child, if that's what they needed, then that's what they needed.
I agree with you. And federal guidelines for colleges say that a youngster, a college student, has graduated on time if they finish college in 6 years. But our high school kids get penalized for not graduating in 4 years. Sorry, my rant is over.
So I guess I'd ask the council, are there objectives or goals that we'd like to talk about in our budget this year? Are there things that we'd like to sort of make sure that we're achieving in the long run as well? We've talked in the past about maintaining the character of the community. We've talked in the past about making sure that this is, a place where there's sufficient affordable housing. Are there things that sort of in the mix we want to make sure are as high level or as much in my mind as getting that gap to zero is for Linda?
I think my thoughts are probably going to add to that number, but in a perfect world, I'd like to see the seawall completed as a big thing that we need to work on. Adequate staffing levels for the police department and EMT service, especially overnight and during our heavy daytime hours. I'd like to see the town work more with the Union Fire District and also with Kingston Fire District to figure out a way to retain and recruit volunteers.
So Rob, if you don't mind if I jump in real quick on that, you had initially had asked how do you operationally kind of solve some problems and what have you, and to kind of pair up with what Bryant is saying, some of the notes that I found myself writing while the discussions were going on is that we need to really create a bigger partnership with our URI neighbors. I've been in front of the planning board and the town council, and I've said it to the transportation committee, and I'll say it till it happens maybe, that we need to partner with RIPTA. We need public transportation in this community big time, and I think that as a school district, if we can create a partnership there, we can look at trying to counter some of our transportation costs with that relationship. They do it in other communities. I also look at the common need that we have for municipal services, and two of the points, Brian, that you just brought up is EMT and firefighters. We have an EMT program within our school. Why not expand on our CTE programs in partnership with our town and get more kids coming out of our school system? I just wrote down CTE students trained for arborists, EMT, firefighters, DPW roles. We need people plowing. We actually have high school kids who own plows who plow privately before they come into school. They'll go out 3 o'clock in the morning, and then they'll come into school. It's just like a bigger picture, and you can look at operational savings, or you can look at it as building our future employees. So it's just kind of like you're saying, a bigger picture idea, but if we create those partnerships now, you can, look at long-term savings, you can look at short-term savings. There's just a lot of opportunity with URI, with our public transportation, and utilizing it. We say it all the time in some of our meetings. It's like, if we have a project that somebody wants to be met, somebody inevitably will say, call the CTE guys over, have them, like the carpentry students built our new kiosk. So we have the resources, and we seem to want to cultivate our future, yet we don't tap it as a resource.
So I hear the URI thing a lot. What do we mean by with URI?
We're creating a partnership with the World Language Program. Maybe there could be, a cost savings, and I'm just kind of throwing it out there, not as something that is possible, but something to be looked at, is maybe we can use their teacher resources with our course selections, or we have our kids going and taking courses there in some capacity. The engineering, the PLT, Project Lead the Way group just went over, we created a way for, and by the way, it took RIPTA to get there from the high school to URI, created a little partnership between our forensic course here with the forensic partnership, the state crime lab over at URI, and now we have a connection there, and they're going to be coming back to us in order to, again, cultivate a relationship. The pharmacy program, the nursing program, we've already started it, and I think it's just really kind of building up on it a little bit more.
So, Kate, the one thing
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's honestly, there are no boundaries to how much we can collaborate with a lot of institutions in our area that we just have not done in the past. We have not been good collaborators, quite honestly. Even just the honors night at the high school last spring, over and over again, graduates were coming up to accept scholarship dollars and saying that they were pursuing education. Very few of them were going to URI. So it was a couple months ago, we had a meeting with the new director of the education program at URI, because we have not only the opportunity to perhaps create a CTE program for education, because there's a lot of interest in pursuing that as a career, but also it just creates, if they are identifying their passion for education because of a partnership we established with URI, that could then fill the admissions funnel at our neighborhood public university, which also then provides greater opportunity for us to expand the student teaching opportunities for the URI undergrads in our own schools. So we're just the collaboration kind of snowballs very quickly. I don't think that there's any end to how many times we could kind of tap each other on the shoulder and say, let's work together on this. And it extends beyond just URI. We have like a Navy base across the water. There are a lot of opportunities for us to identify where we can better the experience that our kids are getting, perhaps, share costs, whatever the case may be. I think that in the past, there's always been this discussion of what are we going to cut? What are we going to increase? And I think what Linda is doing that is really hard work is she's obliterating that narrative and saying, how are we going to right-size our spending so that we are appropriately supporting our students and allowing them to, putting ourselves in a position to say we are providing something exceptional for our students efficiently.
And I know that this feels sort of contrived and uncomfortable doing this kind of exercise, but the reason for doing this sort of exercise is just that. If you know where you want to go, if you call your shots, then you can build your budget to achieve those goals. Right. If you need to spend money to make sure that the at-risk population or that the special needs population is there, and you want to make sure that you're building important relationships with the university and other partners, that's where you put your resources. And while you might want to do other things too, when resources are limited, you still have to focus your attention on the things that you've said you want to achieve. So conflicts come up. I mean, we want new teachers for DLI. Those shots have got to be called, and then you got to stick with the decisions.
The one thing I wanted to add to Kate into your comment there regarding URI is that we've tried as a town over the years to develop a good relationship with the URI. We think we have a reasonably good relationship with URI, but URI has so many different moving pieces and different people in different departments that it becomes difficult. One thing that's good news on the horizon is that I believe in January we're going to have our town and town gown meeting with URI. So it's something that we've been waiting for. It got canceled a couple times, but finally hopefully happening in January. And I do think that there's a lot of ways we can collaborate from a municipal side and also from a school side with the university. But there has to be willing participation on both sides to do that.
I can give you one more example that's actually not a difficult relationship because it already exists, is partnering with the athletic group over there. We have an outdoor track. They don't. They have an indoor track. We don't. We have a cross-country route that is probably one of the most beautiful around. They don't. Again, thinking outside of just the stereotypical concepts. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yep.
We have a bike path that just connected.
I have spoken to folks at URI. They want to have that conversation. We were trying to get the meeting scheduled. So, yeah, no, there are opportunities. And there's no doubt that URI is a phenomenal resource, one that we have not tapped as much as we can. The question then becomes, strategically, programmatically, how do we want to arrange our work and design our workforce so that that actually gets done? And it's not just having the occasional meeting, because as it is right now, to be honest with you, URI and the town of South Kingstown interact a lot. URI faculty are on boards and committees and commissions all over the place. We've got folks who work on the who are part of the university's committees that deal with things like development of the campus, and we've had great collaboration developing solar fields, and there's work that happens. But it's still not a relationship that has been sort of institutionalized in a way that is as deep as we'd like it to be. Now, I would submit that the reason that is because there's nobody whose job it is to just make sure that relationship gets nurtured and deepened. We don't have that person on Linda's staff, we don't have that person on my staff, and nobody at the university has that job. That's the challenge.
I just want to add, I wouldn't say that it should stop with URI. There's a program, Eye to Eye, that a professor at Brown University pretty much spearheaded or runs at this point. And it partners students with learning differences in college with students with learning differences in public schools. And it's just a way for students to gain more self-esteem or whatever it is. And that's something that has been brought up for the past few years. And I feel like at this point, we probably could form a partnership. And things like that are pretty easy. It just takes one meeting, a special ed assistant director meeting with a professor from Brown, and then this thing sort of starts to happen. So I wouldn't say that. I think that we do have opportunities that don't necessarily cost money for doing things like closing the achievement gap. That's one example.
Love that idea, bringing it back to the schools. I would just add, on top of all those other opportunities, we do have the hospital in town, and I think that they could be an institutional partner in forming that collaboration with URI. I think there's, an example down in Westerly, the Westerly Education Center, that's gotten a lot of buzz, could pattern perhaps the development of our own institution off of what they've done there. I do want to just try and bring it back to the nuts and bolts of the special education discussion we were having. From what I heard, we're top 3 in the state for per pupil spending, and the outcomes sound like they're not in the top 3 to me. And so, I don't have a baseline for comparison. I want to know where those other schools are, what achievement they're getting from their spending, and I guess this is why you're going to audit it, or did I hear that right? Do you have a guess about what the discrepancy
Can I ask a clarifying question that kind of relates to that, actually? Because I'm wondering if when we talk about top three, is that, what exactly does that number represent? Is that like the performance, is that the graduation rate? Is that, what is that number that is being ranked? And is it normalized for what percentage of the entire student population would be considered special education? So, for example, if you were to compare our performance in that subgroup with another school district that has just a much, much, much smaller percentage of their overall population that would be considered special ed, that kind of, I'm just wondering if the data is like normalized when they're looking at it.
I know, you probably
The three districts are East Greenwich, Exeter, West Greenwich, and South Kingstown with respect to the per pupil spending. So that's if you're going to rank and say where is South Kingstown, and the last time it was calculated, so we upload our data, our budget to the Department of Ed, and then different information comes back for analysis. So this is as of FY18. That's the last time they've, done this. It's because audits are complete, and so those, if you just kind of, because of course you look, who's number one, or where are we, who's above us, and so that's, kind of top three if you just took the per pupil cost for special education. So with that said, then you start to look, well, okay, how are we doing as compared academically? And again, state report card, assessment results, only, a piece in time. But I did share at the last school committee meeting that we are working hard to peel back our work in our special education program. It is complex. It's not something I can say, like, here's the one piece, we're going to change this tomorrow and it will be fixed. It's more along the lines of, cooking the Thanksgiving turkey dinner where there's lots of pieces going on simultaneously, and sometimes you think you have a plan and then you find out the next day that there's another component of it that has changed as well, and we are dealing with humans. We're little humans and some big humans, and it's complex, and we have to continue to work for continuous improvement with them and analyze it. But I do, in board docs last week when we had our school committee meeting, and I believe I linked to it off of the presentation, I did share about 9-10 different areas in the special education program that we are working on and towards. Co-teaching is one of those, and there are, times that we want to best utilize our staff together and that provide services, and that does mean that is a staffing impact. But then there are times that we can consider, I'm going to say, band-aiding, instead of band-aiding, providing a long-term work. So maybe on the front end right now, there's a cost to it, but we hope we can build this capacity and the strategies so long-term we don't have to have those Band-Aids. But continuing to throw, and it's not always certified staff, but, even non-certified staff or consultants to come in, has a cost to it. And that's okay if it's solving our problem, or more importantly, the children's in the classroom and making it a successful place. But I'm not sure that that's what's happening. So we are analyzing, doing lots of case studies, sitting with folks, peeling back data of different situations and considering lots of different ways to help support programming.
But Abel, I will say too, one of the pieces to the increase that from sort of what I've read in general about special education and what I've seen in South Kingstown is that when you provide a lot of intervention in the beginning, in the early years, like we once had a very robust SKIP program, that offsets future special education costs. And so while we have scaled that program back considerably over the past decade, to really a shell of what it was, we will see an increase in special education costs, because the more you defer services to a student, the more expensive those become, and they end up in out-of-district placements, which, of course, are very expensive. That's what I said I would think would be one of the biggest budget drivers.
So, Rob.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So, if I could just make a comment on this. Actually, I'm giving you another job, Ms. Savastano. I'm wondering if some of the data on the report card says that attendance is an issue, and I'm wondering if some of our young people that are in, maybe one of our subgroups, the children of color, if they're not coming to school because they're not comfortable in the environment. And I'm wondering if that can be one of our goals, to look and see if we can tie those two things together and perhaps, I don't know, get a magic wand. We need to do something. I'm being facetious, but we need to investigate and see what we can do towards that end, and I don't know, see about tying the young people closely to an adult in the building that might work to help to fix that.
We're working very hard to take down barriers for children and try to make, I guess sometimes like the very structured environment is not working for all children, and so we have to, that's when we talk about personalizing and removing those barriers so that we can, so maybe a child has trouble getting out of bed and maybe there's depression involved and suddenly they're not coming to school at all. And how can we work with that family to support them to help keep them in school? And so those kinds of conversations, instead of maybe sending off a truancy officer right away. So we're having those conversations, and I'm lucky to have a leadership team who is very supportive and is doing an amazing job to support that work, but we know we have a lot more to do.
So I've added another item to this goals list, and I've heard this goal expressed many, many times in the last couple of years. It's this Keep South Kingstown Affordable goal and objective, and I think there are two dimensions to it. I'm going to jump down here. I know the council charged the Affordable Housing Collaborative to go off and figure out how to help produce more affordable housing in South Kingstown, and they've actually got a couple of ordinances that are coming up to the council soon. So production of affordable housing is clearly an objective that has been discussed and probably is an objective that folks want to achieve this coming cycle. But beyond that, the tax rate, because we're not seeing growth above 0.79%, the tax rate is going to go up this year. And the question then becomes, what's tolerable? What's fair? What's affordable?
So, Rob, you said keep SK affordable?
Yep.
It's currently not affordable, so it's kind of a different way to look at it, right?
Okay. I guess that's fair. Yeah.
So if I can piggyback on what Bryant had to say a little while ago about the municipal side of the budget, the seawall I certainly agree with. I think infrastructure, namely road maintenance and improvement, I think we need to pay a little better attention to. We've got some real needs there. I have kind of a nuts and bolts question on the budget, and maybe, Mary Ann, this one's for you. I think you indicated earlier in your presentation that the undesignated fund balance from the school side, that some money was used this year. from that, and I think the number was around 700,000.
I looked up the numbers. It was exactly 705,000. Last year was 3.2, and now we're down to 2.5.
So operationally, budget-wise, does that mean that that's an increase in spending beyond what was budgeted? Beyond your approved budget?
No. No, what happened was with this, each year, there's a couple of things that happened last fiscal year. One was we had a significant increases in students going to Narragansett High School for the CTE program. We realized that we went to the school committee and said, looking for authorization to use fund balance to offset that cost. That was a year ago. What we did in this year's budget, the budget we're currently in, we budget the amount that we went to the fund balance for, and then some. So we had the appropriate budget, so we didn't end up with a structural deficit.
So the budget that was approved last year included that
Included that.
$705,000 in
Correct,
spending.
and no, included the 375, and then we budgeted. Each year we budget, if you go back over 10 years, money out of the fund balance as a revenue source, and usually we end the year that offsets it. This past year, the amount in the surplus was significantly less. We ended with $115,000. So that's the other $300,000.
So we weren't able to take the surplus at the end of the year and replace.
Correct.
what you used.
We replaced $100,000, $115,000 of $100 or $160,000 of something like that.
I mean, that's a significant. That behavior can be a significant number. When
It could be problematic, yes.
I mean, going forward each year, you can't.
You can't keep doing that. So if this year, when we present the revenues for it, we'll probably drop that amount from, I think it was 475, probably to $400,000.
But I mean, the general point that we're using the tricks available to us to the breaking point is one that's really worth considering this budget cycle. Again, we're looking at $90 million worth of bonded debt 3 years out. That's a huge, huge number. It's now in terms of absolute year-adjusted, inflation-adjusted dollars. It's not that much bigger than the Broad Rock project, but it's big. This is still a big project. And we don't have, I mean, when they did Broad Rock 20 years ago, they had South County Commons coming online to sort of add to the tax rolls. We don't have anything like that. So we don't have an opportunity here to sort of push ourselves to 4% again this year and hope that everything's going to be okay in the out years. If we push to 4% again this year, we're going to be bumping up against something on top of that, which is compounding, and then we're going to be running into debt service, which is dollars going to pay for some bankers' suits instead of services for children. We really need to be constrained always, but we need to be particularly constrained as we're ramping up toward a difficult, much more difficult fiscal environment. Yes, it's the last year of the funding formula, but that means there's no more money coming from the state after this. This is the last year we're going to have to absorb a big hit in 1 year, but it's also the last year we're going to see any money. I mean, we're going to see perhaps the $4 million again, perhaps. Maybe not, $200 million deficit for the state of Rhode Island being projected right now. So in the out years, we may not even see the $75 after transportation that we see now.
Right, and we also know that we have needs in the way of public safety, EMTs, fire service. That fire service now, that is not a paid department.
Yeah, and that fire service problem is a huge one. Again, if you're thinking about the long run on this thing, if we had to go to a paid department for any reason, it would literally blow up our budget. $6 million that we simply could find nowhere other than the school program. There's just no other way to do it. We have been very fortunate to have a volunteer fire company, fire district, that saved us from having to spend money on firefighter services.
We also have, a fire service that every year it seems less and less people are volunteering for. So that's just something to keep in mind for the future.
Now, I don't want to cast any dispersions or worry too much about volunteer fire service here. The volunteers
Correct.
here seem to be
Great.
holding their own. That having been said, the history of the fire service in this country and around the world is you go from volunteers to combination to paid departments. It happens everywhere.
The one thing I wanted to piggyback on what Joe said, we talk about, and again, I'm bringing it up because we're talking about our municipal budget, balancing it with our school budget, and some of the things that the council thinks about. I think one of the places that we struggle a lot, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, is our current road maintenance plan. It would take forever to address all of our roads currently the way we're doing it.
There is really, I mean, the expense of road reconstruction in particular is extremely high. We have tens of millions of dollars worth of road repairs that could be done on any given date. It's really, I mean, anyone who's driven around South Kingstown knows our road infrastructure is not good. And beyond just not being good, in some cases, improvements that could be made to reduce speed, improvements that could be made to make roadways better for bicycles and pedestrians simply have not been made because we don't have the money. If we want South Kingstown to be a safe place to walk your dog, if we want South Kingstown to be a safe place to bicycle, if we want South Kingstown to be a safe place for pedestrians to cross at the bicycle path crosswalks, we're going to have to invest money on transportation infrastructure improvements.
I have a question for Abel. So over the time that you've been on the town council, would you say that spending on the town side has increased, or would you agree with me that it has increased, especially over the past couple of years? It seems like there are more for the municipal side than there were in the past. Would you say that's fair?
I would say, yeah, spending has increased every year on the municipal side, and somewhat on the school side. I mean, of course, school's been dealing with the loss of revenue, so the increase has not been as noticeable, I suppose.
And so do you think that the town was, I don't know, say the needs of the town were undermet before to sort of warrant the increase in the municipal side of things, the funding there? Or I guess I was under some sort of assumption that South Kingstown was pretty well run. We invested pretty heavily in our goods and services, or particular services and staff.
I mean, it's all about relativity, right? I mean, I think if you compare South Kingstown services that we provide for our citizens, they're very high compared to other municipalities in Rhode Island. You look at our roads, however deficient they may be, they're better than other towns and cities in the state. Our senior services program, probably one of the best. So there's a lot of Debbie Downer commentary going on here.
So I guess it's fair to say that there probably are a lot of wants that we're seeing on the municipal side too, that, you know, is going above and beyond maybe the basics.
If I could jump in here for 1 second, I do think it's a delicate balancing act, obviously, but we have neglected our buildings, our infrastructure, and that has reared its head in the school department's needs to revamp all of the schools. So regardless of how you feel about municipal and school percentages, the municipal side has not invested in the buildings the way we should have. And that now is come to fruition, right? It's come to bear. I don't see how we don't put that down as a goal, to make sure we don't ever neglect our buildings the way we did for the past 20 years, to let it come to this.
So I would like to just share, you're exactly right. I mean, there is no doubt that the municipal side has invested, particularly in the last 2 years. I've been trying very hard to make sure that we're putting money into traffic safety, that we're taking care of things like emergency medical teams. We will, for the first time in the town's history, have a South Station on Route 1. We will have 4 EMTs. Those are new hires. There will be a new truck down there, and there will be living quarters for EMTs. Those are necessary, and it's important to remember, this is in the context of a growing municipality. It doesn't grow at a tremendous rate, but the population is growing. On the municipal side, there are more customers, not fewer.
And I think it's important to point out that if we're looking at 4% increases every year and 2% goes to schools, that's a pretty big number comparatively.
I guess our budget is pretty big too, though.
I'd just like to express a couple thoughts. Up front, I understand you guys are still working through your budget, but if in fact a 2% increase in the property tax transfer is in excess of the 4% tax levy increase over last year, that will be a very difficult request to hand over to you guys. I think it's important that we need to take control of our budget while we can before we can't. If in fact these facility bonds do pass and we are investing $90 million, or 52.5% is equate to $50 million into our facilities, that debt service cost will push us to the 4% max every single year for probably a foreseeable future. An important thing for me is making sure property tax bills are low enough so that young people like myself and those comparable to me have the opportunity to live here. The compounding effect is real. Something we're weary about in the last budget cycle last year was we understood we were voting on a 3.9% increase in the tax levy, and we knew we couldn't do it the next year as well because we are very weary of the compound effect, and we do not want to put that on the taxpayer. It is real, and with these facility improvements that we believe will occur after the bond referendums do pass, if in fact they do, the compounding effect will occur, and it will have an effect on the taxpayers. And I think we have to put constraints to an extent on this year's budget and take control while we can before we can't. Because at some point it's going to be inevitable, and we can't, and we're going to hit the wall. But just something to consider. I understand you guys are still in the preliminary stages, but I just want to get that out there up front. So it's out there, it's clear, and we're all transparent.
Councilman, I just want to clarify. The 2% property tax transfer would not exceed the 4% cap. It would, however, leave the school committee with a $2 million deficit. So the point is their total need is greater than the 4% cap, not the 2% transfer.
But just to reiterate again that this was just a rollover.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's not something that I think folks should go home and think we're at a $64 million ask, we're at a 2%, and we're still $2 million short, so we're going to be campaigning for more. What we're doing is we're looking at things like special ed. Our costs aren't just a little bit higher, making us in the top 3. When we're looking at $111,000 versus $50,000 in other districts, or double. So as our superintendent and our administrative teams are taking deep dives in and peeling back all of the layers and reallocating our resources, that has potential to really make real change. It doesn't mean that when you say look at our gaps that we're going to have to add a ton of things on top of there necessarily. It means we have to move things around so that we're using the resources that we do have in the best possible and the most efficient way. And then just one other thing is, just to remember, we all on the school committee side also need to have safe roads. We also need to be able to call EMT in the middle of the night. So these are priorities for all of us to really consider. And I think that kind of historically over the past couple of years that I've been involved, it's like a municipal versus the school committee, and they want all this, and the municipal still need some of this. I just think that moving towards a more collaborative approach is going to be amazing because we all want to be able to have our kids get on the bus and drive safely to school, which means they need to have safe roads. We all want our parents and our relatives and friends and so forth to be able to call an ambulance, have it come in a reasonable amount of time. So I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate it, and I think that our superintendent and our CFO and all of our administrative team recognizes the importance of that really delicate balance and also where we're going over the next 4 or 5 years as we do consider that bond. So I think just this collaborative approach is going to help us to get to a place where we're not lined up to campaign for what's more important, and instead really look at what the goals are, and the goals are to eliminate those gaps between our subgroups, and also to make sure that we're using the dollars that we have available and that makes sense for our entire community in the absolute most efficient way. And it does involve coming here tonight with a rollover in giving our administrative team the opportunity to really talk to the people that are on the ground level and say, what do you need in order to help us to close those gaps and to meet our educational goals? And then come back with, well, these are the numbers that we are looking at when we're looking at what we need to do that. So the rollover number is not accurate. Saying the rollover plus 7% health insurance increase, we know that that's not an accurate depiction of where we are. So I just would like to make sure that we kind of quell any undue panic at this point, in that we really recognize this is simply, as the superintendent started out, this is very different than where we were last year at this meeting. This wasn't the way that it was presented. So I think from where we're starting out, since it is a very different place, it's worth reiterating that this is not an accurate number that we're looking at. We don't know what the number is yet because it hasn't been built. Is that accurate and fair to?
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I will point out that the schedule for budget meetings this year has been modified to account for the fact that we're trying to do something much more collaborative. You'll note that there is a meeting in February after the school committee has submitted their budget, so that you can give feedback and let us know how that looks to the council. Typically, in the past, the school committee has delivered their budget on the 14th of February to the manager, and the manager has made cuts and assertions without any input from either the school committee or the town council, has presented a budget on March 1st, and the council has worked from there. We've added in this process this year an opportunity for the council and the school committee to react to the final budget before the manager's final submission, initial submission on March 1st. So this process is designed to be more collaborative than we have been in the past. I'm very hopeful. Again, what we're seeing in terms of zero-based budgeting principles, in terms of aiming for the performance, in terms of trying to call shots and really focus dollars on the activities that are going to be most beneficial to achieving the short-term objectives, knowing that the bigger stuff is got to be held in sort of the back of your mind until we can get through the first year, but not just throwing this scattergun approach at everything. On the school side, on the municipal side, we're trying very much to make sure that we're giving both bodies very clear, very well-focused proposals this year. So things like the Matunic seawall, you're going to see, a very specific proposal. You're going to see very specific proposals on transportation infrastructure improvements. So there's going to be an attempt here to make sure that we're giving both bodies something that we can measure and say a year from now, we succeeded or we failed. And therefore, we've got to reconsider our approach.
Thanks, Rob.
I was just going to say, just to piggyback on what I said in terms of the more collaborative approach, the other thing that we have started to do is meet as a budget subcommittee, and it's not just school committee members. The town and the town council has been invited to work with us on those subcommittees, so that on that subcommittee throughout this process, so there aren't surprises, and so that we can have input, just like you're saying, Roy, that you don't want to be put in that position. I think working together on the subcommittee so that we know where each other's coming from will help us at those later meetings.
So I see this as a work session and we're collaborating. So I hope that no one's panicked. That wasn't the intention. I think the intention was to kind of let the school committee tell us what they need, what their needs and wants are, but also so that everyone on the school committee kind of understands what some of the other needs are on the municipal side, so that, if we're going back and forth and trying to find what works best for everyone to make it a win-win, so that we all know where we are actually coming from. And it's not that we're not wanting to give you as much money as possible. It's just that we also have other things that we kind of really didn't plan on, like our emergency radio system. It's going to cost more money than we thought, as an example, which is going to increase spending on our side, but at the end of the day, we really need to make sure that we have a good system in place so that if you do have an emergency, there is radio contact, especially in times of when, say, phones go down or things like that. So again, Emily, you made some really good points there on that, and I got to say, I think I've been on the council for, this is probably my third time looking at one of these, and this particular presentation was so much easier to digest than the ones in the past. So thank you, Linda.
Any other comments at this point? I know it's getting sort of later in the evening. I just sort of piggyback on a lot of the final sentiments that were being shared. Yeah, I think at the end of this budget process, we can safely say that nobody's going to be entirely happy. That's the way it should be. There are things on the municipal side that we would like to do that we're not going to be able to do. There are things on the school side, certainly, that we won't be able to do as well. We will try to work through it, and I really am looking forward to the collaborative nature of the process this time. I think the zero-based budgeting is a big step forward, outcome-based budgeting as well. So thank you for bringing this presentation tonight. It is. We'll get there. And so thank you all for the commentary tonight. I think Rob is probably still curious about what our goals and objectives are. We'll get to that further. If you want to email him, please do that. But I do want to... Did you want to? Okay.
I'd love to get email comments from...
C under 3 is discussion and solicitation of comments from the public. You've heard what we had to say tonight, so if you have something that you would like to share with us, please come up to the podium, state your name for the record, and thank you.
Hi. My name is Stephen Dahl. That's S-T-E-P-H-E-N. Last name Dahl, D-A-H-L. Trying to figure out how to abridge this. Let's see. 5, 10, 15 years from now, wireless radiation will have caused irreparable harm to our greatest asset, our children. I'm your canary in a coal mine now, but back in the mid-90s, I was a cool tech guy, working at Adobe Systems, then the world's third largest software company. When working at a video production company later, I pressed for cell phones in 2001 for all of our crew. So I had a big Motorola clipped to my side, and I'd take it off, my hip would twitch, and I'd say, well, what the heck? Online it says it's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. Anyway, we had citywide Wi-Fi in Seattle in 2005, but I already had it in my house in 2003. It was cool. Since then, I run 2 video production companies, kind of like this guy over here, and I was ready for a career change, so I thought I might like to teach, and so I became a teacher's assistant. I've spent over 400 hours in 4 school districts in Rhode Island, including South Kingstown. Working there, I saw things I felt were disturbing. I also saw some good things, by the way, which I think the teachers are mostly brilliant and should always be respected and admired. I also started feeling some health problems I've never felt before. And I decided to try working at Peacedale Library for something different. There I began having memory and cognitive problems and insomnia. That was, I would sleep 2 hours and I'd wake up, ping, and it was really hard to live that way. In addition to heart this is at work at the Peacedale Library. About 10 feet from me was the Blue Socket wireless transmitter for the whole library, and including the 12 computers that they have. They're stationary, but they're all wireless, so the little waveforms carry information on them, and they were going right through me, which isn't great. especially if you can feel it. In addition to the heart palpitations, stomach cramps, flushing, and the headache toward the end of the day, I was wondering what's going on. I finally realized that I had worked 10 feet from the transmitter, and when I quit, I felt substantially better because my home environment did not have Wi-Fi, which I eliminated back in 2009 as a precautionary measure because we had a 2-year-old and we were expecting another child, and I looked at all the things online and I thought, we're going to get the vaccinations because that's pretty much a no-brainer. We don't want to get, any of those bad diseases, so let's get those. But, it's not a big problem for us to just go wired. Why not just wire the stuff? I know how to do it. So I did it. Anyway, so I could tell the difference. I've seen boys in behavioral rooms that I believe are both made hyperactive to the point of violence. Studies show that mice are excited by radio frequency. I've seen rooms full of autistic middle school boys, and Martha Herbert of Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School has written about the correlation with autism and radio frequency, and that it affects all children to some degree, but especially those who are already experiencing learning difficulties. So, yeah.
Okay, so just
sure.
Out of respect to everybody in the audience, are you asking the school committee or the town council for a policy?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the lead in here. I wanted to. I respectfully submit my comments to you, South Kingstown Town Council. Your decisions have a direct impact upon me, my wife, our children, our community, and our health. I object to the thousands and thousands of dollars being spent on wireless communications equipment in our town and school budgets. We hear a lot about safety, but we don't understand that the wireless radio frequency radiation from our smart meters, Wi-Fi, etc. is bad. I'm going to skip ahead. With wired technology, we can serve our children, but with wireless, we destroy their minds, bodies, and futures. Each day, I send my children to school. It's like putting them on a bus with a dangerous, unlicensed driver. There are currently no standards for wireless communications in our country that have any relevant meaning for their health. Indeed, the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2013 said as much in its letter to the Federal Communications Commission regarding its radio frequency radiation standards, and I quote, "The AAP urges the FCC to adopt radiation standards that protect children's health and well-being. Children are not little adults and are disproportionately impacted by all environmental exposures. It is essential that any new standard for cell phones or other wireless devices be based on protecting the youngest and most vulnerable populations to ensure they are safeguarded throughout their lifetimes," unquote. Nor do the current standards, still not update, reflect current use patterns or provide meaningful consumer disclosure. Meaningful disclosure hasn't happened because the industry hasn't been forced to by law. We need meaningful disclosure at point of sale so people will know what's happening to us physically, mentally, and emotionally. That's why parents have no idea that cell phones have been demonstrated to cause clear evidence of cancer by our National Toxicology Program. That's the gold standard in research. Our country does it through the National Institutes of Health in its 10-year and over $25 million study of the less powerful 2 and 3G cell phones. Anyway, the report's been buried. But let me jump ahead. We need certified building biologists for our proposed high school. Check it out. These people are used by architects. They're used by builders. We need them. We also need these building biologists in our existing schools. They also take care of things like mold and asbestos and lead in tap water. These are the people that can do it. Our children aren't going to know what to tell you because they've lived their lives being exposed to radio frequency radiation. They're not going to know why they're having a headache, why their nosebleed may be linked to it, why various other symptoms may be linked to it. The data that the Rhode Island Department of Education looked at to enable the 2012 Wireless Classroom Initiative is now dated and inadequate. We have had much research since then that's shown us that it's a big problem. And it's not just cancer. It affects all of our systems. We're electrical systems, and it affects our minds and bodies.
Thank you for that commentary. It looks like you'll have it printed out in a form that you can perhaps send to us on the
I
council
can.
and also
And,
the community.
if anyone's interested, it's you can look for the Rhode Islanders for Safe Technology. It's not all technology that we're against. It's the wireless kind, and Rhode Islanders for Safe Technology will tell you more about that. Also, a great website, Understanding EMFs, a Google site. If you put that in, it's Understanding EMFs, a Google site. That will also help you. But yeah, I can submit that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your help.
Good evening. I'm Joe DeSantis. I'm the President, CEO, Tri-County Community Action Agency. I was here last year, and I went through a litany of services that we do provide. I am very appreciative of the council having reinstated the $24,000 that we asked for. That meant so much to us. I'm also appreciative that I also believe that we had General Assembly support for that effort. So that meant a lot to us, to my agency. This year we did not apply for funding, and we are applying for the pilot program. So I'm hoping that we will get some tax relief for that building on 1935 Kingstown Road. That building, I believe we're paying about $35,000 in taxes. What I would like to suggest, if I'm not being too bold, if the town council passed a resolution saying that we could be tax exempt, I can get it through the legislature and be, by state statute, be tax exempt. I know other local nonprofits have that status. I also know that some nonprofits have $3.5 million buildings and do not pay any taxes at all. But really, if I get the $24,000 tax relief, would be the same as the revenue, I wouldn't be too unhappy. But I really would like to be treated like every other nonprofit. We do roughly around $2 million in this town, and we're vast and varied in terms of our services, from Head Start to fuel assistance and weatherization, and the AMP program where we give refrigerators and air conditioners to people. So we're very diverse. So any consideration you can give, I would appreciate it. And I don't know if you have to vote tonight or what the political process is, but that's really my hope. And Bob, I don't know if you had anything in mind relative to my request. Maybe you could help me with that.
So, Mr. President, just for the council's awareness, we have received an application for a pilot agreement from the organization. We are reviewing that application now, and will make a recommendation with regard to that application to the council as part of the budget process. The final resolution of that application really doesn't happen until April, when the council passes the budget. It is, based on the information I received last year, highly likely that we will be recommending to the council that a pilot agreement be entered into equal to the amount of the taxes that would be paid. Now, I'm not there yet. I haven't done it. The $24,000 may be the recommendation. It may be slightly above that, depending on a number of factors.
So, Mr. DeSantis, thank you for coming very early in the process.
Well, I didn't want to miss, because we did last time.
I remember last year. Rob, that does bring to mind, what is the application deadline for outside service agencies if they wanted to apply?
Actually, we haven't established it. It will be January. It'll be sometime in January. We haven't got a specific date at this point. But the application for the payment in lieu of taxes was yesterday.
December.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you very
for coming
much.
forward. Any other public comments at this time?
I'm sorry, can I make one more comment? I sat through this whole school committee budget, and I found it very interesting. But we do run a Head Start program with around 30 children, and I'm not sure, and maybe you guys can tell me, if we do have a relationship with the school department, because we're really, those Head Start kids are South Kingstown kids, and they go into your school system, and they're largely economically deprived. So I don't know where we are with that, and I think I believe, Linda, that you're a new superintendent, so we never could get around in working with the last one, so I'm hoping we can have an improved relationship, and I look forward to that. So thank you.
That's Joyful Learning, or is that somewhere else?
Joyful Learning, and we also have a federally funded 3 classrooms Head Start program in our Kingstown Road site. So Joyful Learning is a daycare, and Head Start is a federally funded program. And those are the most economically deprived families in this town. And by the way, we did do a certified nurses assistant program in North Kingstown, and about 3 of those families are from Columbia Heights. So I just wanted to make that point. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Gary Chapman. I just have a quick question that may be a long answer, I don't know, but I don't know too much about the federal funds that the school department receives. I guess the Title I, Title II, Title III stuff, I guess majority of it's Title I. No? Okay. Anyway, you received, I guess, $1,498,000 that you revised your budget on in October. And can you explain to me how that works? Because you had said to me that in your response to my request that it's outside the operating budget. But I noticed you revised the operating budget with it in it, and then you revised the expenditure statement to match the revised revenue statement. So I'm just trying to figure out how this all works.
I think we think what you're referencing is the way this Department of Education requires that we report to them. Okay. So that's what those documents are. I can explain the federal funds. We at a really kind of high level, quick, and I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy to explain it publicly at some point, like in a longer workshop. But we apply for those funds in around April, and while they are federal funds, they are managed by the Department of Education, so it's a pass-through through the Department of Education. We qualify, if you will, for a certain amount in each category: Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, IDAB, and preschool. Yep. And they all have very different rules. IDAB is for special education, for example. Title I is dollars you receive based upon your free and reduced lunch population, including private school and public school together. So Title II is for professional development. Title III are funds that we receive for our English language learners. The preschool is actually for special education preschool, and then Title IV is a bit more free, although there's a piece of it that's restricted to technology. And so there are different amounts that we qualify for, again. And so you write grants, pretty extensive grants with very strict guidance to the Department of Education. Those are usually due for, they want them for June 1 if you're using them to pay for summer. And if, summer school, for example, summer program. And July 1 if you're just planning on using it for the next fiscal year. And then it's an approval process, and some years longer than others, and they kick back and work with you on those funds. There are different rules for different areas. For example, IDAB, you have to show that you have to show maintenance of effort for special education, so you can't reduce your special education budget, and so those. But if you really again treat those funds with Again, they have different rules. There's, meant to be supplemental. But if you look at those funds and have them fit like a puzzle with the rest of your goals, then you should be able to leverage their use.
Okay, I understand that, and I appreciate what you said. I'm just trying to figure out where the money fits into the overall picture. I mean, the adopted budget was $61 million and change last year, or for this current year, and with the federal funds, you revised it to $62,889,000 and change. And I guess my question is, how did you spend that money if it wasn't budgeted when we went before? How do you spend the federal funds? How do you do it?
I'm not exactly sure. It had to have been budgeted. I'm not exactly.
So it was in the 61 million, or it wasn't in the 61 million?
We don't spend the dollars.
Where my confusion is coming in, though.
We don't spend and because I'm new, and so it's hard for me. I can speak to the grants because I managed them for 14 years in a previous district, and it's run the same way in every other district.
Okay.
Marion can speak to the history of this current fiscal.
So these funds are federal funds through the Rhode Island Department of Education. The IDEA money's been around since 1976 when IDEA, it was PL 94-142 at that point. The bulk of that money is for salary for special education teachers, salary and benefits, and there are some tuitions and stuff like that we pay out of that. We apply for those monies every year. And when we build our budget, we build all the salaries, and then we reduce the salaries by that amount that'll be grant funded. We estimate it to be how much we think will be grant funded, and it stays it doesn't get volatile. It's pretty consistent. Every so often we'll hear that a particular, it was the titles a few years ago that we did receive a reduction. So with the title, like Linda says, it's for the economically and educationally deprived students. And there's schools that in our district that reap the benefits, and it's usually, again, it's reading teachers. So a lot of it's for salaries. And so when we build our budget, we take it out and bring forward a budget without those things in it. The reports you've seen are the projections we provide to the school committee each month. Those projections are projections that are required by the state of Rhode Island to submit to the state. And what the state wants is they want those federal funds in. Those federal funds have not been approved until late summer, early fall. And this year was even later than that. So that's why you don't see those numbers in there in July 1. Although we think we know what they are, we're not going to put it in until we get the final approval. And once we get the final approval, we made that budget adjustment. And then in our last report, because these funds, we can carry them over, our last projection, what we do is re-reconcile it. So if we budget $1.4 million and we spend $1 million, we're not going to show a $400,000 deficit because we can't do that. We have to reapply for those funds. So what we do is we balance them out, showing that we have received the $1 million instead of $4 million, and the expenditures of $1 million. They're grant reimbursement. We have to pay the money first, and then we apply to get reimbursed.
Okay.
And they're audited under the single audit.
Well, that explains it, because in other words, your budget actually is the 62. It's just that you took those funds out when you came for the budget adoption because you knew you were going to try to get the balance of those through a grant.
We're pretty confident that when we apply for it each year, because like I said, the funds, especially IDA, has been around since 1976.
So when you put your budget out this February 14th, you will do the same thing roughly? You will have in your mind somewhere there, or on a piece of paper somewhere, that says that we think we're going to get this much money, and these positions are not in the budget, but we're expecting to do those.
One pager in the budget binder which had all the grants listed and how much were based on each category, salaries, benefits, the same object numbers that we have in the regular fund.
Yeah. I guess the thing that confused me...
more than a detail, because the detail hasn't been approved yet.
Okay. The thing that confused me is when you did put together your revised budget with the federal funds in it, the corresponding revised expenditure statement had things in it like that you boosted up medical insurance retirees. Why would that come under that?
That would not be under the grants. What happened with the medical retirees? We budget health insurance, budget retirees' health insurance. We don't know in February how many people will be retiring come June. So what happened this year, we had more retirees, so we reallocated those money out of the regular health insurance into the retirees.
Okay, so that didn't come out of the federal funds then?
The funds are for
all balanced out.
Federal funds are for active teachers.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I was just wondering why that it seemed like the 1,400 that you put in when you run the expenditure line, that was part of it. But if it's not, if it's somewhere else, I understand. Okay. Thanks.
Our federal funds, if we were using it for that.
Hi, Lauren Weinstock. Sorry, I had surgery a few days ago, but I thought it was important to be here this evening, so that's why I winced when I stood up. I just really briefly want to reiterate, I think, Councilman DeCruz, you had commented on the presentation from the superintendent tonight. I just want to say I found it so much more accessible than the presentations we've had in recent years, and really laying out for the community what exactly we're talking about as we're entering into the budget discussions. And I just wanted to thank the superintendent for that. I'd also like to thank all of you at the table tonight. I really appreciated the collaborative nature of the discussion and the work that you've all put into making this focus, and a lot of this is driven by Mr. Zarnetsky, although you described it as a little bit of a convoluted exercise. I think it's very valuable that we're grounding this discussion in common objectives and goals. I would just expand that, or I would encourage you to expand that to also include values. The goal is the destination, the objective is the action, but what guides us is our values and our shared community values. And as we move this discussion further, we're talking about a lot of money, we're talking about a lot of resources, and we're talking ultimately about equity and serving our community. And so I really, again, would like to encourage you to think about values as part of that discussion as well. I just, again, say thank you for what I thought was a really productive first meeting.
All right. There will be many other opportunities for public comment as we go through the budget process. Are there any other comments from up here at the moment?
If I may, I'd just like to check with the council and the school committee at this point. As I mentioned earlier, we've built one more meeting in. Is there any interest in any more? I built this schedule trying to balance everybody's interest in keeping some private life during the budget cycle, but it does occur to me that the only opportunity for the council and the school committee to get together between now and the 14th is a CIP hearing. So, again, I just asked.
I have a excuse me. I have a question. I'm not able to attend the January 7th meeting because there was a change in date, I think, from the 6th to the 7th. But I just wonder, the exercise you started us to do, I really like it. I think it would be a shame and almost maybe dangerous if we didn't finish it and see it through. Is that part of the intent, to come back to that at some point on the next meeting?
So if we were to schedule another meeting, absolutely. The meeting on the 19th is the wrong time to be doing that. It's after the, it's not the, you can always do this stuff, but on the 7th, that meeting is supposed to be focused on CIP. There's nothing that would prevent us from broadening that meeting to include a component on the operating budget. We work for you. What do you want to do?
Yeah, the CIP is usually pretty quick.
Because we fight over the microphone too much.
So,
budget subcommittee meeting. It seems like that would be a good place if any town council members are able to attend that next subcommittee meeting. We could really get into the nuts and bolts of that. And in the meantime, if there are any comments from any community members, they could send them on.
So that's certainly a possibility. And again, Linda and I work for the town council. She works for you guys. Whatever your preference is, we'll figure out how to make it work. If it's a subcommittee meeting, we're going to have to figure out how to get all of the town council or more than 2 of the town council members there. It becomes a noticed meeting for the town council as well as for the subcommittee. So it gets a little bit, it's certainly doable, but we just need to know that up front.
This budget subcommittee, the purpose of it really was to, instead of creating more meetings of this many voices in it, was to do the really deep digging in those subcommittee meetings so that we were going back to the business meetings and treating them as a business meeting rather than like a really deep budget dive. So again, we're in the same situation where we have 2 folks from the school committee that have thankfully raised their hands. They want to be on the budget subcommittee, and then I'm able to attend when it's feasible with the schedule, but we're still not in danger of creating a quorum. It's still just a subcommittee meeting. So, I think it's it's critical to have a town council voice in those discussions. I think it's very important that's when those talks about the goals and harmonizing the goals, I think it should take place there so that these work sessions can be incredibly productive and we can kind of work through what's been built.
Could you send that document out to everyone that's here tonight?
I will do
and then maybe what we could do is we could make it so that they can fill it out somehow, submit and collect that data, and we can see what that says.
That might make sense, especially if you're contemplating sort of creating a part 2 of the CIP work session, or part 1 of the CIP. You could get that material gathered before that meeting, so long as nobody's talking about it amongst themselves. You could even review those materials prior to the 7th, and then talk about those goals and objectives on the 7th.
And to follow up what Stephanie mentioned, the intent of the budget subcommittee was to have town council representation there so that we can work together. The valid point still stands. So I don't have a problem with the CIP number 1 being extended or number 2 being extended if people can't make one. But the whole point of the budget subcommittee is, it's we want to hash out our end of it, but we know we're part of a bigger budget, and it's to have representation there.
So just a quick question. When is the next budget subcommittee meeting?
I believe it's January 2nd.
Yes, I actually remember that. That's correct.
While people are looking, can I just
Thursday, January 2nd from 5 to 6.
I think that if this conversation is continued in a budget subcommittee meeting, then we have to have an additional step, such as Councilman DeCruz suggested, which is gathering everyone's input over a Google Doc or something, because this is too important of a conversation to simply be at a subcommittee meeting where you're not going to have everyone, in my opinion.
Well, we can at least gather the information, the data. You can send it to the chair of this subcommittee, I imagine. Then we can discuss it there. I have been appointed to that subcommittee, so I'll be there.
I think that information should go to not just the subcommittee, I think everyone.
It should definitely go to that subcommittee for one thing. It can go to everybody else as well. But if it's going to be a discussion topic at the subcommittee, we need it there.
So I would propose that I'll send it to all members of the council, and I'll give it to Linda if so everybody at the table will have, a place to put in their list of goals and their list of short-term objectives.
And also include a copy of what we've already added.
Yep, absolutely.
And we're also moving towards recording them. They won't be live, but they will be recorded and then posted so that they're accessible.
So the fact that they're publicly noticed means that they're legitimate under the Open Meetings Act for the members of the subcommittee. If we were to end up with 3 members of council at one of those meetings, we would have an OMA problem. So we just have to be careful. Noticing it is for the specific purpose of the group.
Right. And so perhaps, sort of depending on the conversation that happens at that January 2nd meeting, we can decide whether it's wise to add on to the work session. Any other comments up here?
Just a quick question. So who's going to decide? The committee's going to decide whether to add?
Well, I think as council president, I'll make that determination.
That's fine.
All right. I mean, with input from other people, of course. All right. Any other comments up here?
Actually, just one point. Linda actually does make an interesting point about that procedure. She notes that if that's the procedure, then the input into the January 2nd meeting will only be what you've got tonight. There won't be any input from the 3 members of council whose thoughts have not been captured on the document yet.
And actually, there's only one person from the council. If I remember correctly, we only Rory couldn't do it because of the time, and Abel stepped in to his space. So there's only technically one person, I think, on that subcommittee from the council.
You could always.
But we could always send a second person.
That's fine. You can.
But what if a second person can't make it? I guess is the only other thing to think about.
So I guess the way to resolve that issue would be to make sure that everybody's comments from the council get back to me so that I can get them to Abel before the 2nd.
Yes, and then they would have to be publicly available for that meeting as well. Somehow we'll post to that information that we're sharing with the committee, right?
Can you work
yeah,
out the
get some time.
We'll work on the problem.
But basically, Abel, you're going to be the one to determine the property tax transfer, right? Like you're thinking probably 4.
I don't think so. All right. So, any other comments up here? No? Very good. Well, it's getting fairly late. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Better not exclude my points from the homework, man.